think I got lost. Oh, okay. Okay, thank you. So this is an outline. I'm going to make some general thoughts on pandemics, a bit about some experiences with HIV, and then I would like to make some comments, an opinion. Remember, it's my personal views about SARS-2, the successes and the failures. I want to comment a bit about the role of innate immunity, not so much the kind that we're accustomed to talking about with specific vaccines, but you know plenty about that, and I will mention them. But I want to talk to you specifically a little bit about innate immunity. And then lastly, the preparation for the future and the importance of the global virus networks, or the GVN, which you all already heard about. There have been 4 great pandemics in the past 100 years. Pandemics. There was the flu, of course, the great influenza of 1918 and 1919. There was polio of the 1950s, HIV of the beginning of the 1980s, or really late 70s, and of course the current one of SARS, coronavirus 2, from, I made a huge mistake. That should be 2019, of course, not 1919. Pardon me for that. Okay, so in these pandemics have been about 1 generation apart, about 25 to 30 years. But there have been many epidemics in between, or occurring at the same time. These pandemics and most of the epidemics have some things in common, like the dengue, the SARS, the MERS, various influenza strains that have caused some serious outbreaks in addition to the great pandemic, chikungunya, West Nile, Ebola, and Zika. All of these, as well as the 4 pandemic viruses of the last 100 years, have been caused by RNA viruses. They have that in common. They have some other common characteristics. They reproduce rapidly. They have very high mutation rates, RNA viruses do. And except for HIV, they are very easy to transmit. HIV is an important exception to many things that we will be speaking of. So you can't put all viruses into one basket. You have to study each independently. But the major RNA viruses that have caused epidemics have had several features in common, of course. The question comes up about remembering the lessons of pandemics. It is said that we will never forget SARS-2. Don't believe it. We will forget it. And its disease, COVID-19. We always forget. And we are already forgetting about HIV and AIDS. The history of polio shows that by 1950, we forgot the great influenza of 1919. And I can attest, I can confirm the fact that in the 1960s, when I came to NIH in Bethesda, Maryland, we did remember polio. We did remember serious epidemics and pandemics. But by the 1970s, we disregarded serious epidemic diseases. I speak of my experience in America around the city of Washington, D.C. at the National Institutes of Health, but I can speak for science in general also at that time. Therefore, it would seem that our memories tend to fade after a generation or so. So as we of this generation will never forget, so to speak, SARS-2, if it disappeared tomorrow, I suspect that 30 years from now, we would forget about it. Not completely, but certainly we would tend to lose some of its lessons. I'd like to return to the 1970s with you because that's something I personally experienced. As I said, when I came to the National Institutes of Health, there was a healthy respect for epidemics and pandemics and serious infectious diseases. But by the 1970s came some remarkable prejudices, biases. I make quotes, but these were general feelings or general opinions. Serious epidemic infectious diseases are over for us in the industrialized world. Therefore, we could forget about it. It was a problem for tropical disease institutes and for people over there. Over there meaning not in the industrialized nations. Today, it would not be an acceptable philosophy, even if it were true. It would be politically most incorrect, but it's also most untrue. There was also a feeling that a category of viruses we call retroviruses do not infect humans at all. And many reasons are given for this. If we had time, I would tell you that what we faced in trying to look for human retroviruses. There was a great deal of scientific disbelief that they could even exist in humans. Certainly they weren't present. And finally, I come to that no viruses cause cancer. This was the feeling that viruses were involved in cancer was prominent in 1940s, 50s, 60s, but by the 1970s, it ended. It was felt that no infectious agent played any role in any human cancer. It was a formal conclusion of a major meeting at Cold Spring Harbor Laboratories in 1974 on the origins of human cancer. However, by the early 1980s, these biases were overcome. Viruses were by then shown to be involved in the cause of about 20% of human cancers on a global estimation. This would be virus playing a role in one step in the cancer, or in some cases, like HTLV1, it does the whole thing and needs no cofactor. The second thing is retroviruses were discovered in humans, and they were shown to cause some leukemia, unusual in the United States and Europe, but prevalent in some other parts of the world, including in many parts of South America, Japan, Iran, strangely, Romania, strangely, parts of Indonesia, the Aboriginal people of Australia, the Caribbean islands, and their ancestry in certain tribes of Central Africa. This same one virus not only causes leukemia, but it can cause a T-cell leukemia, I should specify, of adults. It also can cause a very serious neurological paralytic disease. And it can cause modest immune abnormalities and sometimes autoimmunity. These viruses are human T-cell leukemia virus, or HTLV1, 1980. We discovered this, and then HTLV2 in 1982. I must say, HTLV2 is rarely causing disease. HTLV1 is extremely oncogenic. If you're infected from your mother's milk at birth, you have a 20% chance of getting leukemia. If you're infected as an adult, it's about 4%. That's very high for any carcinogen, and certainly for any microbe, virus or bacteria. And as everyone knows, one of the great pandemics of history, AIDS, appeared, caused by still another retrovirus. My last point on this slide says, how did developments occur? However, unfortunately, there won't be time to go into that. I will switch to, not switch, I will stay with pandemics and raise another question which is interesting. We like to think about origin of pandemics. For me, think of one word, change. Something had to change, either in society or in the virus. I give you some examples with this slide. We could make many more examples. The Romans going to the eastern end of the Mediterranean ended up with new serious epidemics in both directions. The discovery of the Americas led to smallpox in Indians and syphilis to Europeans, among other exchanges. Air conditioning led to Legionnaire's disease in modern times. The destruction of the forests and Lyme disease, because the deers are in my backyard, but also deforestation in other parts of the world leads to many other potential epidemics, including the possibility of viruses from bats, like these coronaviruses. World War I and the Great Influenza, believed to have started or really concentrated in an American Army barrack in Kansas, by soldiers congregating, and this thing just took off. Where it came from originally is unknown, but clearly World War I contributed to that great pandemic. And then there's a genome change, and a good example is a fairly harmless gastrointestinal virus, or enterovirus, mutated to become neurotropic, targeting cells of the nervous system, the central nervous system. That was the polio virus. After World War II, we had massive social changes: airplane travel, tourism, sexual promiscuity increase, the insanity of intravenous drug abuse on a global scale, the medical use of blood and blood products, sometimes moving from one country to another, leading to the mobility of the virus that causes AIDS, and really the pandemic of AIDS. How it first began, as you probably all know, was of course from primate into human in the rainforest. But its concentration to an epidemic and then a pandemic is for these, because of these social changes. Do we want to find the origin of SARS-2? Lots of talk about it, lots of newspaper articles. I disagree with my scientific colleagues. I don't think it's so critically important. You will say, well, we must know because then we could prevent it. But it's either directly from the bat or bat to animal, or it's a lab leak, or both. We can act on all those assumptions right now. If we found out it was a lab leak, would we do anything different than we do now? I don't think so. We would say you better use BSL-4 facilities. We would say they better have proven, trained people to work on such viruses and have international agreements that must involve China. We must be collaborative in a pandemic. We would then just say, what kind of experiments should be allowed? Should there be gain of function experiments? I think there must be, for knowledge protection and so on, but always with management of risk versus benefit. Maybe we should consider having intelligent lay people as part of the review process, or at least that the review process includes other people other than virologists. Obviously, it must have important virologists involved, good virologists involved, but maybe we can't just leave it to us. Maybe we need others to evaluate the risk versus benefit. So in the end, I think we need to be working together to solve the pandemic, and not stressing of whether it's direct from bat or whether it leaked from the lab. I mean, we know that bats all around the Southeast Asia have coronaviruses. We know that. And we know bats can bite other animals, so it's possible for transmission. We know that. What would we do differently if we had additional information? Not too much. Now, that's a controversial position that I'm taking, but when I think about it, I don't know what's wrong with just acting instead of constantly fussing about what happened, because it becomes politics. I would like to give you my feeling about the response to the pandemic of SARS-2. Diagnostics and advisory role was slow. The leadership poor. The leadership was variable. I think it was a failure of government leadership, and the scientific response of all of us was slow. There's also great variability among different governments. Which government should we listen to? England's Boris Johnson at the top? US with Trump? Or should it be Japan that wasn't going to do anything? Or Sweden that said, let's have herd immunity, which of course doesn't work, and on and on. There was great variation. I don't think we should tolerate anymore. I think government has to lean towards organizations that have the science on all viruses, like the Global Virus Network. We need government. We need them for money. We need government. We need them for oversight. We can't just run wild. They have to be involved, of course. But should they be the scientific leaders? Should we limit ourselves to a few government people making decisions and speaking for the science of it all? I think not. With therapy, the early antiviral specific treatment was disappointing globally. That's our fault, our laboratory scientists. I'm not sure exactly why, except to say it's with HIV, we have to remember this was a historical breakthrough. We never had treatment before for a systemic viral disease with proven success until we began with AZT in 1985, 1986 for HIV. So it's not such an easy thing. And also with the acute viruses, of which SARS-2 is and HIV is not, of course, with the acute viruses, it's very fast that the virus is replicating before disease is taken over. So you don't have much time to do antiviral specific therapy. Still, it's been disappointing on a global scale. And then there comes the treatment of the anti-inflammatory disorders. These were overstated and sometimes very wrong. Hydroxychloroquine wasn't what it was supposed to be. Plasma infusions, when I was watching that occur in high-level medical centers, I thought, how disappointing, we haven't come very far. That goes back, what, 100 years? And then remdesivir, it was somewhat exaggerated. Dexamethasone helps, but I believe for the anti-inflammatory drugs, true advances will be coming soon. I have no time to go further on that. Vaccines, as you all know, so far, in many respects, so far so good. Astounding results at the start with the messenger RNA vaccines especially. But like many acute viruses, it's not so difficult to get a vaccine against an acute virus infection. It's easy to find the cause. The virus is virtually dripping out of the mouth. It's not hard. You can make diagnostics straightforward, although we had difficulties with cross reactions and some delays that I never understood completely. This is, not hard to show the cause. So rapidly you can move on it. The key information came from the January 10th publication from Chinese scientists of the genomic sequence. There was speed and coordination with the great messenger RNA advancement, mainly because the particles that contain the RNA were protected. That was the scientific advance. Honestly, I didn't think this could develop so well. Messenger RNA is easy to degrade, but the great advances in the chemistry of these fatty molecules that protects the RNA led to the breakthrough, in my mind. Induction of the antibodies to the spike and surprisingly strong T-cell responses appeared both as being productive. The T-cell responses last substantially longer and needs more scientific attention because there may be limitations to the success of the vaccines. Longevity of the antibodies is going to be a problem. They may last, I think at best, a half a year with strong antibody levels. But we do have the memory B cells that can be stimulated when you're exposed to the agent, and they seem to be lasting much longer. And then the T cell responses. So the T cell responses and the memory B cells so far could be the savior of the issue of longevity or durability. We have another issue, as you all know, very well, especially people coming to the meeting from Brazil or Peru, and that's variants of the virus. Now the headlines and every focus is on the Delta variants. Certainly these are of concern, but the disease still seems to be controlled or is controlled by the vaccines. There are problems that are emerging, but it is too early to be certain and for me to make further comments. I want to now turn my attention and your attention to innate immunity. Stimulating innate immunity can occur with old vaccines whose efficacy is known in the specific thing they are made for, whose safety is known, and who are very, very cheap. and could be readily available. And the problem with these innate immune stimulating older vaccines, they also stimulate adaptive immunity to a specific virus, but I'm talking about their ability, because they're generally live, replicating, like measles, mumps, rubella, oral poliovirus, live shingles, intranasal flu, yellow fever, BCG. These being live will give a more powerful and longer lasting innate immune stimulation. The problem with them and why we haven't grabbed them and ran with them is because they don't last very long. It was thought to be maybe a month. There's newer data from Mihai Netea of Romania, but working in Holland at Radboud University, that it may be substantially longer than people thought before. It might be as long as 6 months. That would be fantastic if it could be proven. He did that with BCG. Anyway, why am I thinking about it? We can compare the two types of immune responses. What you're used to hearing about with a vaccine is, of course, the adaptive response, involving your lymphocytes, B cells making antibodies, T cells that include killer T cells, etc. On the innate side, it's myeloid and other cells that are key. They produce a lot of interferon, and not mentioned on the slide, also activated natural killer cells. They are the key of the innate immune response. There are other keys that we still don't completely understand. Now, when we give a vaccine, let's go back to the adaptive, like the messenger RNA vaccines for SARS-2 or any vaccine for SARS-2 that we're all taking now. It takes a few weeks to develop the response. Innate immunity comes almost immediately, within an hour or two. The other difference is the adaptive immune response is present only in vertebrates like us. Of course, we also have the innate immune response. But in invertebrates do fine with only the innate immune system. Let's go back to the adaptive. Efficacy, it's virus specific. Innate is effective against many viruses, not just the one it's made against. Durability can be lifelong. Measles, smallpox, or it can be short, flu, and maybe SARS-2. In the case of innate, it's always short. That's the weakness. Safety is variable for adaptive. The innate, we already know from experience, safe. The cost for developing an adaptive specific vaccine, like the messenger RNA vaccines, it's relatively costly. The innate stimulation, inexpensive. Funding for research, billions of dollars for the classical specific vaccines that stimulate adaptive immunity, whereas innate immunity is very poorly funded. There are reasons to think of innate immune vaccine stimulation with these live attenuated vaccines, even in a pandemic. Bats, why did we think about it? I thought about it from learning about bats. Bats harbor coronaviruses, but they hold them in check totally by innate immune mechanisms, not by antibodies or T cell response, but by constitutive low-level interferon and NK cells. You and I have had many infections, especially me, I'm older, where we just had mild symptoms or no symptoms at all. How do you think we got better? Not because the virus decided to go away or because the virus ran out of cells to infect. No, it's because of our innate immune system. Some of our symptoms of low-grade fever, if we get one, or tiredness or malaise, is due to the innate immune system response. I was also induced to look at the genome of SARS coronavirus 2. And you see that it has part of its genome specifically designed to avoid innate immunity. This suggests it may be very susceptible, or it wouldn't have done so. Clinically, beginning with a paper from a Stanford group, but I won't go into the details of the paper, that better prognosis correlates with innate immunity. That's what the correlation is with in infection. like interferon, not with antibodies or killer T cells. The durability is a big advantage of the conventional adaptive immune stimulating vaccines. But the classical approach with SARS-2 may not yield antibodies that are durable. We talked about that already, but the T cell response could very well be durable and may be enough to protect. I have to say that I should add that to that statement. This slide was made some months ago. There is clinical evidence that higher levels of interferon correlates with better prognosis. So what are the opportunities for using the broadly stimulating, innate immune stimulating vaccines? At the beginning of any new epidemic or pandemic, to fill in the gap of time between the appearance of the new epidemic and the time it takes to develop effective, durable, specific vaccine, which is usually over 2 years, if successful, as has been with SARS-2. So I feel, and I did take an innate immune stimulating vaccine in the years preceding the availability of the specific vaccines. I took what I could get. I was looking for OPV. We couldn't get it anymore. So I took measles, mumps, and rubella with my wife, as did many leaders in the Global Virus Network. Whatever they could get, some took the intranasal flu. We were taking it about every 2.5 months. So the beginning of a new epidemic, my argument would be we should be out there with these innate immune stimulating vaccines. We should do it all the time. One of the reasons it's not being taken up so easily is that there is a fear of people who are already against vaccines and the confusion it would cause. I agree with that. There would be confusion. It's a matter now of educating and understanding. It also could be used for countries that cannot gain access to the specific vaccine for even longer periods than a few years, as is now occurring. Thirdly, if there's a problem with durability of the specific vaccine, or if the vaccine is unable to handle some variants, please think about live, attenuated, broadly inducing innate immune vaccines. Couple these, another possible use is to combine the live attenuated vaccines like measles, mumps, rubella, like OPV, like BCG, etc., like intranasal flu, with the specific vaccine. It won't make the specific vaccine worse. It could only enhance greater potency and possibly help make it last longer. What are some of the problems going forward with this approach? Most important is a lack of understanding among the population and even among scientists. Second is a fear that this may cause confusion in the public, I've already mentioned that, and lead to greater resistance in vaccination. Third, the durability is very low, likely only a few months. Fourth, the unjustified fear of side effects, sometimes overly promoted with OPV. The fact is, in America, in the 30 years of use of OPV, at least where I know the results, virtually no cases of polio emerged. If you are a vaccinated population already with OPV or with the killed Salk polio vaccine, then in billions of doses, there's been little or no side effect. But if you don't want to use OPV, there are other things like what I took, MMR. Finally, there is the concern that they may interfere with the specific vaccines, but on the contrary, in my mind, they are going to enhance efficacy of specific vaccines or do nothing. There's no market value. They're very inexpensive. This should have been listed as number 6, and maybe that shouldn't be underestimated. There's no inducement for anyone to to develop these things for this kind of use, because they're not, they're just available cheap. I think, for example, it's like 15 cents for OPV pill. MMR, where I went to my drugstore to get it, it also was cheap. It was a few dollars. Okay. I don't think I won't have time to go in this. I think we're coming to the end, so I better skip this. I was going to make some comparisons. They will be obvious to you anyway. Let me look at this slide and just get to what is unique that I should want to say. There is some silver lining with the black cloud of HIV, the third bullet on this slide. Question is, will there be one for SARS coronavirus 2? What do I mean by that with HIV? Well, with HIV, the United States before HIV had very little big public health programs in Africa, for example. And now with President Bush, W. Bush, his President's Emergency Program for AIDS Relief, we started with $58 billion, not million, but $1 billion for helping Africa for therapy. And this has grown and extended and continued by President Obama and also during President Trump's period, and it's still continuing. So that, and the second is that it really focused more on patient rights, on women's rights, yeah, I think those are the main things I could think of that are social, that were positive. It brought us closer, I think, north-south in public health. I don't like to hear statements comparing the speed of progress with HIV. People think it's technological great advancements that led to such speed with SARS too. We look at the success we had with therapy, the first in history with HIV. Furthermore, HIV was far more difficult to show the cause, to find the virus, to prove the cause, to be able to grow the virus, etc. It wasn't simple with virus just obvious and coming out of one's mouth and nose. So it's not quite a fair comparison. And yet, and it used to be said by people at WHO that it was the fastest speed in the history of medicine from a mysterious disease to where we had the genes, the blood test, and very good blood test, which was developed in my laboratory at NIH, actually. A lot of advances were made fast with HIV. But it also left me with the thought, and some others, that we needed in the future more assurance of trained virologists throughout the world. Virologists come into the field by chance. They hear a lecture, they get stimulated, they decide to be going to virology. This is not tolerable for the future. We now know that. There was a decline at the time of HIV in the number of trained virologists, very low. We need to make sure that doesn't happen. We need experts in all viruses, that include experts in all viruses, connected, and that's what the Global Virus Network did. We also decided to make it completely free of government. There's a disadvantage, and that's financial. There's an advantage. It brings everyone together. So the Global Virus Network has Russia, has China, has America, has everywhere on Earth. There's no exclusion to it. But we need more from nations that have more trouble with infectious disease. For example, here we are at this Congress, and we are speaking to people from the world that is speaking mainly Spanish, but also Portuguese. And in your countries, we need much more involvement with the Global Virus Network. And anything you can do to help stimulate that, I don't think you will ever regret. So we think it's essential for South and Central America, as we think it's essential for the world. I will not have time to go into this, but you already know, and I've already said this. I'm mentioning that I think the role of government is essential, but the but is a big but. I think the science has to be driven by more private and university organizations-led organizations. And these would be the GVN, CEPI, the Gates Foundation, working with WHO and reporting to global governments. That's the science that I'm talking about. We need to improve local public health, certainly in America, and I think probably everywhere in the world. We need more and better local surveillance mechanisms. And as I suggested, it'll be controversial. We don't seem to get the attention I believe it deserves, but I would strongly recommend considering at the start of an epidemic to come in strongly with innate immune stimulation by live attenuated vaccines. Maybe we should call them broadly effective use of vaccines. I thank you for your attention. And my special thanks is to Professor Eduardo Gottuso, not only for the invitation, but for my knowledge of his personal devotion to medicine in virology science and for his active role in the global virus network. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Gallo. This is a real outstanding lecture for us. And of course, during the Congress, we like to promote the GVN, this important network you found in almost 10 years ago. And we feel Latin America, we have a different environment. We have the Amazon region. We have a different virus in our history. And probably we will work very close with you and all the GVN group. Really was very important. You are advisor, you are experienced, and you are outstanding lecturer. Thank you, Bob, for this support to the Congress. Dr. Monica Thorman, from the new president from the API, will send to you regards and thank you for all your support and also support with the symposium from GVN. Muchas gracias, Dr. Gallo, por esta excelente conferencia y esta mirada de un gran experto que nos ha traído diversas cosas de la historia, revisión importante de esta inmunidad innata y finalmente las miradas futuras, donde una de las cosas importantes es desarrollar network, redes importantes, especialmente en virología, que él promueve a través de el GVN o Global Virus Network. Es importante, revisen la página web, los que sean virólogos son invitados, ese es el esfuerzo que se ha hecho para esta consideración. Con esto terminamos esta plenaria y muchas gracias.